It's getting hot in here!
Hey guys, what's up? We're going to be looking at the first almost 30 cards that have been revealed for the next Hearthstone expansion, which is Kobolds and Catacombs. So we're going to be looking at the first set that was revealed on November 3rd, as well as the more recent releases that have started coming out on November 20th and 21st. So the first card was Baron the Fox, which we actually have now. And I have to say, this didn't really perform that exceptionally. You haven't seen it in any constructed decks of merit, really. You can throw it in there just to have some fun, but it didn't really do too much for us. So I guess we'll be going with a rating out of 5 stars for how good a card is, and that's based on basically its playability in your decks. So since this card sees no play unless you really want to include it, I would put it as a Prince Malchezaar style of card that is just negative impact on your deck, but hey, it's kind of fun. I'm going to give it a 1 out of 5. The next card we see is a new Hunter card. This is a spell, 7 mana, Crushing Walls. Destroy your opponent's left and right most minions. Okay, this card is pretty weak in my opinion. It has a conditional that your opponent has to have at least 2 minions. You don't always get to pick which minions you'll be hitting with it. It's expensive, and Hunters already have a lot of hard removal. If you were to give something that is hard removal, it has to be pretty efficient because you're competing with things like Hunter's Mark and Deadly Shot and even Freezing Trap. So for 7 mana to kill 2 minions that you didn't actually get to target, I think that this is pretty far-fetched, and I would give this a 1 out of 5. Next up, we have Gather Your Party. 6 mana, Recruit a Minion. It's a warrior card. I fail to see how the recruit mechanic is going to work with cards like this. They seem so overcosted, so you have to discover a minion that is like 6 mana or more to really make it efficient. And I don't know, you could have just drawn that minion, right? Like, you could have drawn the minion instead of this card if you just didn't have this card. It seems really bad to me. It seems really bad. Maybe there's some way you can make it work when you only have a very few minions in your deck, but I would put this at a 1 right now. Some of the other recruits get a little bit of a higher rating, but overall recruit just feels really high costed on the cards we've seen thus far. Maybe a 2. I don't think it's really going to get played, but there's a chance. Okay, next up we have the legendary priest weapon, Dragon Soul. After you cast 3 spells in a turn, summon a 5/5 dragon. This is a 3 mana 0/3. It does not run out of durability, so once you equip it, it's going to be there for the rest of the game. Priest is pretty good at casting 3 spells because of things like Shadow Visions and just all of the spells they already like to run. So this seems pretty strong, and we've seen some other strong dragons for Priest also been revealed, even though we're just a small amount into the set. So I would rate this very highly. I would give this a 4, maybe a 5 for playability. And its mana cost is just so like efficient. You're going to be able to equip that really easily, no matter what point in the game you draw it. Yeah, seems great. That seems like a really strong card. More good priest cards. It's a little scary. Next up, we have a Luneth. This is the mage legendary weapon. This one is a 6 mana 0/3. At the end of your turn, draw 3 cards. Okay, so this also does not break like the priest weapon, and that means that this weapon is pretty crazy. It's kind of like you've gone mad with power, right? You're drawing 3 cards. Plus, you're going to get your normal card draw, so you're getting 4 cards a turn now. And can you even use your cards that fast? Like, your cards have to be pretty low costed. It's going to continue even when you start hitting fatigue. Eventually, you could replace it with a Medivh weapon. So if you're playing this and Medivh, and you play this first, then you could play Medivh after. But what if you just happen to draw it, like, when you're later in the game? Do you even play it? Is it just a dead card? I think this one is much more questionable than the priest card because of so many scenarios where it seems like a negative impact that you've used it. And so I would rate it as probably a 2, maybe a 3, but I'm leaning more towards a 2. There might be a deck or two which plays it. but I don't see it being common. Next up, Unidentified Elixir. So this is a priest card, gives a minion +2/+2, gains a bonus effect in your hand. And so it can be +2/+2 in lifesteal, divine shield, summon a 1/1 copy of it, and death rattle, return the minion to your hand. I don't know how I feel about this card. So it just rotates through these bonus effects. +2/+2 for 3 mana is not very good. But +2/+2 in divine shield for 3 mana is decent. Summon a 1/1 copy of it if used on a good minion, such as a Death Rattle minion, which some priest builds already try to have synergy with. I think could be powerful. This is a hard card to judge. I'm going to put this at a 3 just because I'm not really sure. I don't think it's going to see that much play though, so that's probably too high of a rating. Maybe a 2.5. Next up, Jasper Spellstone. This is the first of the Spellstones, and we'll probably see a Spellstone for every class it looks like. We've seen a couple other ones. And a Spellstone is a really cool type of card. I really like this mechanic. It starts as something, and then if you do something while it's in your hand, it upgrades. So it's important to mention that if I gained 6 armor all at once, it would not upgrade twice. You have to do it each time, being like a different increment. So it starts as 1 mana, deal 2 damage to a minion, which is actually pretty good. That's like Arcane Shot, although it can't go face. I'm glad we've learned that we can't just make spells go face, but 1 mana spells, especially for a druid, tend to be pretty powerful, so I think this one has a lot of potential. And you could be playing 2 of these, of course. And then it upgrades after gaining 3 armor, which is not very hard to do. Deal 4 damage to a minion, and then 3 more armor, it'll upgrade again, deal 6 damage. So yeah, I think that's very strong, and I like that type of mechanic. It's kind of like a quest you're completing in your hand for not a game-winning value, but a nice bit of value later on. I wonder if we'll have an animation that shows your opponent you're getting power to it. Next we see the Sapphire Spellstone. I feel like this one was not as good. I mean, the low mana cost on the Druid one, oh, I didn't rate it. The Druid one would be like a 5 out of 5. Maybe a 4 out of 5. It's a very playable card. The low mana cost on it is just so good. The Shaman one, on the other hand, 7 mana, Lesser Sapphire Spellstone. Summon 1 copy of a friendly minion. Overload 3 mana crystals to upgrade. Summon 2 copies of a friendly minion. Overload 3 mana crystals. Summon 3 copies. Okay, let's think about this. First, overloading 6 mana is a lot harder than gaining the armor. It's not impossible to overload that much mana, but you're going to have to play something pretty chunky. And this is very expensive too, so if you're playing a deck with overload, it's going to be hard to get a clean 7 mana turn. This is competing for slots like Bone Mare, so 7 mana is very competitive lately in terms of what your power level is. And it feels like unless you get the summon 3 copies, you probably didn't get your value out of it. If you're summoning 3 copies of a Fire Elemental, yeah, it was pretty good, but it wasn't even game winning for how much effort you had to put into it, so I would rate this one much lower than the Druid one. I'm going to give it like 2.5 out of 5. Next up, we have Guild Recruiter. 5 mana, 2/4. Battlecry, recruit a minion that costs 4 or less. I feel like that's actually a nice thing that it's recruiting a low cost minion just because you could target what minion you're going to get out of your deck a little better. But it's hard for me to see what you're really getting that's worth 5 mana for this body. 5 mana, 2/4 is really bad. You're essentially paying 2 more mana on a 3-drop that would also have a conditional. Like 2 4s for 3 mana do something. And so for 5 mana, it has to do something really amazing. 4 mana is still a decent cost though. If you only had like a 4 mana minions in your deck, playing a 2/4 that pulls a Violet Teacher or Ascension doesn't sound that terrible. It's a neutral card. It feels more like an arena card to me than a constructed card, just because its stats are so low. I would rate the Guild Recruiter a 2 out of 5. Wandering Monster. That's a Hunter Secret. When an enemy attacks your hero, summon a 3-cost minion as the new target. Okay, more Hunter Traps. There's some Hunter Trap stuff you can do right now. I don't really think this is game-breaking enough. It's similar to Bear Trap, but instead something actually takes the hit, which can be nice because it's a defensive mechanic then. But there's already so many secrets that trigger when an enemy attacks your hero if you've ever played against a secret hunter, you often just find yourself sitting there and waiting out the secrets because they don't have a lot of other cards in their hand at that point. And this would be another contributor to that problem, because if your opponent's not attacking you, it doesn't do anything. So I have a hard time putting too much faith in this card. I would give it a 2 out of 5. Next up, Carnivorous Cube. Okay, this guy, I've seen this guy and I've talked about this guy a bunch already. 5 mana, 4/6. So 5 mana, 4/6 is great stats. That's what Druid of the Claw has. And instead of Taunt, it's going to get Battle Cry, destroy a friendly minion, Death Rattle, summon 2 copies of it. Okay, so just think about this effect. It initially seems like it can be good on almost any minion. If you have a Yeti and you just trade with that Yeti and you have a 4/2 and you eat it, you're going to get 2 full health Yetis back. So you only used up 2 health, and in exchange you're going to get 10, which is really powerful. But if you go the extra mile and you eat a Death Rattle minion, you get even more stuff. There's some specific synergy on curve, such as the Devilsaur Egg, or is it Ravasaur Egg, and the Twilight Summoner, which is the 3 mana and 4 mana Death Rattle cards, which have summon a 5/5 as their Death Rattle. So if you're eating a Death Rattle card, you only lose the initial body of the card, which is like the egg, and then and you trigger your Death Rattle, so you get your 5/5. And then when this dies, you have this insane board presence, because now you have this dying and summoning a Death Rattle minion, which will summon another big minion for you. So the on-curve potential this adds to decks, I think, is really huge, and I'm going to give this a 5 out of 5 for how playable I would say it is. This card is definitely going to show up somewhere, and it's a pretty cool card, so kind of looking forward to it, but we'll see how it pans out. Next up, we have Rune the First Disciple. This was the Warlock card. And Rune is a 6 mana 3/6 with Taunt, Death Rattle, add the first seal to your hand. The seals are 5 mana cards, which will, when played enough times, destroy your opponent's entire deck. It's a little complicated. I think that this is a really slow card, and it'd be super hard to play, but destroying your opponent's whole deck pretty much means you win the game. So yeah, if you could ever find a way to pull it off, like, it's a very powerful mechanic. There's nothing else that destroys your opponent's whole deck. There's not a lot they can do about that either. They just have to have cards in their hand already that are able to kill you at that point. So I'm going to try it at least, but I would say this is not very playable, and I would rate this a 2 out of 5, maybe a 1 out of 5. It's really slow. Next up, we have Cobalt Illusionist. This is a rogue card, 4 mana 3/3, Death Rattle, summon a 1/1, a copy of a minion from your hand. This card is a tricky card. I feel like rogues have some tricky stuff they could do with it. I could see there being some weird decks that you make with this. Its stats right away aren't impressive, but yeah, just because of all the tricky stuff rogue has, like this in combination with a Shadowcaster, so you play this on turn 4, and your opponent has to decide, do I kill that? Because it has a Death Rattle and it's going to do something. So if they don't kill it, then you can Shadowcaster the Illusionist, or you could trade the Illusionist and then Shadowcaster the minion that comes out of it. There's some interesting potential there anyways. I think that this card's like a 3 out of 5. I could see someone making a deck with it that's actually really good, but most people probably won't be using it. And then we have Draggled Stealer, and that will finish our early release cards. It's a 2 mana 1/1, Death Rattle, add 3 Silverhand Recruits to your hand. Okay, so they're introducing some more Silverhand Recruit synergy to this expansion. Seems like they're trying to make it work. I think this card in Wild is crazy, because I've been playing Wild, and the Recruit decks in Wild just get so much synergy. But in Standard, synergy is a little more lacking. I find it hard to believe that Silverhand Recruits are really going to be the thing unless we see even more cards added to them. We'll see one other one being gained for them in a minute, which is important, but it's not that great. Personally, I'd like this more with the hand buff style. Just forget the fact that they're Silverhand Recruits and add 3 minions to your hand and then buff them all with some hand buffs from Paladin. That seems potentially very powerful. So I don't know, I'll give this a 3 out of 5. I think it's got a unique fit in there. It's also a death rattle card, so that's kind of handy for paladins. Alright, moving on, we are up to the more modern releases. And the first one we'll be looking at is Branching Paths. So at first I didn't think this card was very good, but after thinking about it a little more, it's pretty decent. So I think what you have to look at for this is, well, we'll just talk about the card first. This is a 4 mana, choose twice, draw a card, give your minions +1 attack, gain 6 armor. Okay, so you can pick the same effect twice, or you can change it. Flexibility does have a power consideration. If we're not considering flexibility, you can gain 12 armor, which is basically greater healing potion. So in the worst case, you're just taking greater healing potion. It's not amazing, but it can be good. And then it's flexible. You don't always need to use greater healing potion. Sometimes you can give your minions +2 attack so that they can make a trade. Maybe +1 attack is all you need, and then you draw a card instead. Meaning that you're hitting the effect of the card at its maximum power almost every time. So I do think this card is pretty decent, and I would actually rate this card maybe like 3.5 to a 4 out of 5. I think it's better than a 3 out of 5. Not game defining, but is good enough to see playing constructed, and flexibility has always worked out in some really powerful ways in Hearthstone. So I think that this card is another flexible card players will like to use. Next up is Katharina Winterwisp. This is a Hunter Legendary, 8 mana 6/6, Battlecry and Death Rattle, recruit a beast. I don't know, it would work with N'Zoth because it has a Death Rattle, but 8 mana 6/6, I mean that's Marin, and Marin is terrible. Recruiting a beast sounds good until you think about the fact that most Hunter decks just play really low cost minions right now. You're going to have to see a pretty fundamental change if they want to include this. This just seems like another big Hunter Legendary that nobody's going to use, and it's going to get added to that pile that we all walk by every time we're going to play Hunter, and then we just pick high main as the top end. So I would rate this card a 1 out of 5. Maybe a 2. The fact that it has Death Rattle gives it a little bit of potential, because Hunters do have a bunch of Death Rattle synergy right now that they're not using. Maybe a 2 out of 5. Next up, we have Level Up. So this is our Paladin synergy we were talking about. And this is give your Silverhand recruits +2/2 and taunt. If you think about it, there used to be a card very similar to this, and it's Quartermaster. Quartermaster was a 5 mana 2/5, so not great stats, but it was a body, and it gave your Silverhand recruits +2/2. So instead of getting the body of the Quartermaster, we're getting taunt on them. It's kind of a bad trade-off. In most cases, Paladins have a lot of taunts already, or they have a lot of healing. So they don't really need the taunt effect from this, and you're just losing the stats. But we have other cards in rotation like Vine Cleaver, and Vine Cleaver is a 7 mana paladin weapon and summons 2 recruits every time you attack. That is very hard to clear those recruits every time if you're against it. So I think there's a lot of room to maybe stick some minions to the board, but that this card is overall pretty slow in terms of its stat value. And we do see decks with a lot of board clear potential in the current meta, so it wouldn't surprise me if we continue to see that in the next meta. So for this reason, I find this card hard to rate too highly. I would give it like a 2.5 to a 3. I don't think it's actually going to make the K cap in here. If we see just a little more recruit synergy though, one more way to get them, then I think we could talk business. Okay, Duskbreaker. This one's been talked about a lot, and yeah, it's really strong. 4 mana, 3/3. It's a dragon. Battlecry, if you're holding a dragon, deal 3 damage to all other minions. Okay, so I think the easiest way to describe why this is powerful is, you know the Warlock card, Abyssal Enforcer. Abyssal Enforcer is a really good card. 7 mana, 6/6, deal 3 damage to everything. So what this is saying is it's as good as Abyssal Enforcer, except that for every mana extra Abyssal cost, it would gain 1/1, which is not a fair trade because every extra mana is supposed to be more than 1/1 stats. This doesn't work that way. And because it's a board clear, coming earlier in the game is always just going to be better, right? You wish you could play your Abyssal earlier. If it somehow had a way to decrease its stats and be played earlier in the game, you would use that, because earlier is when the minions only have 3 health. So I think that this card's really powerful. It clears a board and it plays a body. It's a dragon itself, so it's giving you synergy on your early game stuff. Overall, 5 out of 5 for the Duskbreaker. Next up, Cheat Death. So we see this one and one of the rogue secrets so far. We'll probably see a third. I'd be surprised if there was only 2. This secret seems really good. This is 2 mana secret. When a friendly minion dies, return it to your hand. It costs 2 less. Okay, so one of the things I want to mention is when you play rogue, you really often only have a couple of minions and they're pretty important. So being able to cheat death on an important minion is awesome. Even if it was just like return it to your hand, it seems like it'd be pretty good. But you're actually completely saving the mana cost on this and maybe even setting up some later fancy play. If rogues only have 2 secrets, I feel like it might be kind of easy to play around. But yeah, they got to kill your minions at some point, especially when you taunt them up with a Bone Mare. This just seems like great card value for a rogue that's interested in keeping some minions. So I would rate this card very highly. I would give it a 4 out of 5. Also, it's a spell, and rogues just get so much synergy with spells. Here's the second rogue secret that we get to see so far. This is Sudden Betrayal. Secret: when a minion attacks your hero, instead it attacks one of its neighbors. So, yeah, I mean, it's like a misdirect. It's pretty good, though, because a lot of the time people hit rogues in the face because they're trying to kill them. So, I think that this one's not as good as the previous secret, but it adds something by also being a secret. And it's not terrible. It's spell synergy. It's doing something. I would give it like a 3 out of 5. It's playable. You could see it in some decks, even if it's not the most optimized. It'll stick around for a while and make its face known to keep the other rogue secrets, keep you guessing about the other rogue secrets. But I'd be really surprised if we only saw those 2 in the end, because you wouldn't have too much to think about if there's only 2 secrets. Next we see the Rune Spear. This is a Shaman legendary weapon. 8 mana, which is really expensive. 3/3. After hero attacks, discover a spell and cast it with random targets. Okay, so yeah, I mean, this one's pretty crazy. You do get a 3/3 weapon, which is okay, but you're paying a lot of mana for it. 8 mana is a really high mana cost, especially for a shaman who doesn't have any way to influence their mana value. If anything, they have negative impact on mana because of overload. Discover a spell and cast with random targets. I mean, you can kind of see how this works with the Tortolian Forager. Seems pretty questionable. There's going to be times where like you don't even have a good spell to pick. I would rate this rather low. I'm going to say it's like almost unplayable. 1.5 to a 2. Probably not quite a 1, but it's getting close. Okay, we see another Spellstone here. This is the Warrior Spellstone. Summon, it's a 7 mana card like the Shaman one. Summon 1 Mithril Golem. Equip a weapon to upgrade. Then summon 2 and summon 3. Okay, so summoning 3 5/5s is pretty good for 7 mana. It's not game winning, but it's good enough to beat out any other competing 7 mana play. Summoning 2 5/5s is okay. That could have been basically any other 7 mana card and it would have been just as strong. So when we're judging this power level, I think we're looking at how hard it is to upgrade because we really want it to hit the 3rd effect. It's not that hard to upgrade. Equip a weapon, but if you only have like 4 weapons in your deck, then maybe you didn't draw this. You probably didn't mulligan for this. You didn't draw it till like turn 4. You'd already played one of the weapons. Now you only have 1 weapon in your hand. It might be that you're not really getting this upgraded, so I'm gonna rate it a little low. I would give it like a 2.5, probably not a 3. We'll say a 2 to 2.5. Next we have the Feral Gibberer. This is a 1 mana 1/1. After this minion attacks a hero, add a copy of it to your hand. So I think this card would be just like busted if it was a 1/2, but at a 1/1 it's very easy to remove. Your opponent's pretty much always going to have control over whether you're going to be able to attack with this. And yeah, I mean, you still have to play it again. It's not like it was free when you got the extra one. I would rate this pretty low. It's an interesting idea, but it's clear they didn't want it to be unbalanced, and I'm glad for that, because 1 mana cards that have 2 good stats can be really OP. I would rate this rather low, though. I'm going to say this is basically unplayable. It's like Tunnel Weaseler status at this point, so I'm going to give it a 1 out of 5. I don't think you're going to see it at all. Okay, next up we have the Druid legendary weapon, Twig of the World Tree. This is a 4 mana, 1/5 with a death rattle, gain 10 mana crystals. So these are full mana crystals. Basically just means you get a whole extra turn when this gets destroyed. The only way I think that you can destroy this early without just attacking 5 times is by playing Mediv. That seems to be the only way you can destroy it early. However, playing Mediv is a really strong turn because if you had this equipped and you played Mediv, then you used up your initial turn's mana by playing Mediv. Now you've broken the weapon, gained 10 mana, and you can use that 10 mana to cast spells with your new Mediv weapon. So you could just Ultimate Infest and get a 10 mana card. I think that's really the combo you're trying to hit. But even if you're just attacking with this 5 times, it seems pretty good because you're setting up a play. You're deciding when you want this extra turn to happen. It's almost like a mage quest, except your minions don't get to attack, right? You're getting like a whole extra turn just by playing this thing. And it did some stuff, like it still gave you 5 damage for 4 mana after a while. I would rate this card pretty highly. I'm going to give this 4 or maybe even a 5. I think you could see this in a lot of different kind of, quote, big druid decks. So, yeah, I would give it a 4 to a 5 out of 5. It's a pretty good one. One of the nice things of the Twig is you don't have to build your deck around it, right? Like the Mage legendary weapon, you have to build your deck around because you're going to be drawing so much stuff. You're not going to be able to do that with a normal deck. But the Druid one, you could just put that in, and as soon as you're planning to play the game for like more than 5 turns, that card is going to be very useful to you. Also, if your opponent breaks it, like if you play it and they Harrison it, well, now you have 10 mana, so it wasn't even that bad, right? Rummaging Kobold, 3 mana, 1/3, return one of your destroyed weapons to your hand. So this seems pretty clear. Homage to the fact that we're getting these legendary weapons. Now we have a terribly statted minion that can give us another one. How useful is another weapon so far, I guess, is the question we would ask, assuming we were only getting a legendary weapon. The ones we've seen are Priest, Mage, and Druid. And the Druid one's probably the most useful, but I don't think you really want it twice because it's really slow to get that much turns in. The Mage one you wouldn't want again, and the Priest one, unless they broke it, it's never going to break on its own. I would rate this card pretty low right now. I would give it somewhere between a 1.5 to a 2. I think it's going to be hard to see this being played. There's a way, though, that somebody finds, like, you know, maybe with one of the new legendary weapons being really good to add it back and then something. But right now, the legendary weapons just don't seem to get too much out of that. So the ones we've seen are mostly the spellcasting ones. Almost there, 3 more cards. The next card up is one of the ones just released today. Spiteful Summoner, 6 mana, 4/4, Battlecry, reveal a spell from your deck, summon a random minion with the same cost. Okay, so 6 mana, 4/4, stats aren't great, but as long as you get a spell which is 4 mana or more, then this was actually very good stats for 6 mana. Like just flat neutral play. If you get a spell that was 4 mana or more, like, yeah, it's a random minion, so there's some RNG there. But overall, as soon as it's 4 mana or more, you're getting a good board out of this, better than what your typical 6-drop would have been. So I think there is room to see this played, especially in decks that use a lot of high-cost spells. You think of Druid, and they're playing like Nourish and Ultimate Infest, Swipe, Spreading Plague. You know, there's maybe only 1 or 2 low-cost spells left that they would have to worry about pulling that weren't efficient. It's a bit of a gimmicky card, like it's not really playing to a strategy, but I feel like it could actually end up being powerful. And in Arena, this card is just bonkers good because you don't have that many spells and you're probably going for high-cost spells. So this card in Arena is really, really strong. Next we have Zola the Gorgon. This is a 3 mana, 2/2. Battlecry, choose a friendly minion, add a golden copy of it to your hand. Okay, so all this really means is you're getting a minion back in your hand. That can be pretty good though, and like right away I could think the Exodia Paladin where you're adding one of your hero powers back. right? There are so many ways that getting a second minion of a specific minion can be really powerful for a deck. So I don't think you're just going to play this, you know, willy-nilly, but if you see a reason to play it in your deck, I think you could definitely include it, and there's probably a bunch of decks that could see a reason to play this. On the other hand, it is pretty slow. Its stats are not great for its mana cost, so you're looking for the value game. I would give this like just above a 3, somewhere between 3 and a 4 for its power level. So I guess we'll say a 3.5 because it's playable and you can see it in a bunch of decks, but it's not like a defining part of why those decks will be powerful. It's just good enough that you want to include it because of some synergy. And the final card we're going to be reviewing for the day is the Seeping Oozling. This is a 6-mana Hunter card. 6 mana 5/4. Battlecry, gain the death rattle of a random minion in your deck. This is a 6 mana 5/4 with death rattle. I mean, you might only put 2 death rattles in your deck and then it could be really strong, right? Say you only played Ravasaur Egg, and then your death rattle is summon a 5/5, 6 mana 5/4, summon a 5/5. That's not even that good, is it? That's like Cairn. No, this card seems terrible. Like, even in the ideal scenario, you got the best death rattle, you might as well have just played Cairn Bloodhoof, because it's not a beast either. Its artwork is cool, but its stats seem very underwhelming, so I would not recommend playing this card. I would give this a 1 out of 5. The fact that in the best situation, it's not even as good as like a competing play. Also, it's competing for the mana cost of Highmane, and if you're playing Death Rattle deck, you probably have Highmane in your deck. Yeah, 1 out of 5. Okay, well that concludes the review of the first 28 cards revealed. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. If you have any thoughts, let me know, and I will see you for the next one.